Yep, all yours.
Rock and roll. Thank you. So, you guys, first of all, can everybody hear me okay? Volume's good.
Yep.
Rock and roll. Okay. So thank you, Mahmoud, for inviting me to come and talk to everybody today. And thank you, everybody, for coming to listen. As we were kind of joking a little bit earlier, this is my first lecture style presentation in quite a long time, actually. And it's something I'm pretty familiar in doing. I'll say a little bit about myself in just a second. But thank you for coming to the talk today, which is titled The Nature of Sports, Morality, and Virtue. So, who am I? I am Jordan Goldstein. I guess technically I'm Dr. Jordan Goldstein. I have a Ph.D. in kinesiology. And I'm probably the world's worst kinesiologist because I can't even tell you 95% of the names of the muscles on the body or the bones or what connects to what or what does what. Okay. So I'm a very bad kinesiologist. And that's because by trade, I'm a historian. All right. When I was in my undergrad and doing my master's, I was in history. And I was always extremely interested in the convergence between identity, collective identity, like national identity, and sport. Like, so I come from Canada, so the stereotypes are true. It's like, why do Canadians love hockey? Why do Brazilians love soccer? Why do New Zealanders love rugby, et cetera, et cetera? Like, what are the connections between cultures and particular sports that become grafted onto their identity? But in the academy, historians don't take sports seriously. And so I had to move into kinesiology to find a very small niche field, which is the sport history field. And so I got my PhD in 2016. I recently turned my dissertation last year into my first full published manuscript, which is titled Canada's Holy Grail. And it's my exploration into the donation of the Stanley Cup, which was Canada's national ice hockey trophy. And if we have any ice hockey fans or fans of the NHL, that's the big Holy Grail that they hand out at the end of the year, the greatest trophy in the world. In the world of sports, and in my opinion. And so for 7 years, I was a teacher in kinesiology. I was a university prof in kinesiology, teaching sport history, sport philosophy, and sports sociology. And I fell in love with philosophy, and in particular sport philosophy. And it merged really nicely with my historical perspective. I would call myself more like a philosopher of history, somebody who crafts narratives rather than somebody who goes and digs things out. So philosophy has always been something that's very interesting and intriguing to me. And through teaching philosophy and history at the same time, I was able to come up with what I believe to be a unique philosophy of sport, or a unique philosophy of movement, which is tied to the historical evolution of individualism, and the progression of liberty in societies. And I wrote about that in an ebook that I published in 2020 called The Athletic Hero. It's on my Gumroad. I should have linked it. It's free. It's a free download. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today.
We'll link them eventually. Don't worry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are talked about in much greater specificity and detail in the book. All right. So that's definitely a great place to go. So that's kind of like my academic background. But if you follow me on Twitter, you know that's not what I do anymore. I quit the university in August. I now have my own coaching and consulting business where I use my philosophy of sport that I've created to coach athletes, coaches of athletes, and also I hire individual clients who are just looking to reach another level in their life. And I can use the metaphors and the language of sport to help them get there. And we activate that through the body, which is sort of like my philosophy applied. And it's basically me resuscitating and reviving what I believe to be ancient wisdom and ancient truth around sports, but applied for a modern context. And I've come to this through living it. I used to be somebody who was heavily involved in sports growing up, but then I moved away from them, especially in my early adulthood when I was going through my studies. And I've recently, over the past 8 years, gotten back into consistent physical activity. And the thing that I do more often than not is trail running. And you can see that's a beautiful picture of me with a frozen ice beard after I went for I think a 10-mile trail run in negative 20 degrees Celsius weather in January. One of the best trail runs I've ever been on in terms of the beauty of the environment, the challenge, and just the love of doing something hard. And essentially, like, when I think of sport philosophy, that's what I think of. But sport philosophy isn't something that most people, A, ever hear about, B, think exists, or C, why do we even have this thing? So I'll be a good Socrates, and we'll start off our discussion with a question, of course. And I'll just throw it out there. I have a particular understanding of sport philosophy, but I'm interested to know what people out there think. Like, how should we think about sport philosophy? When I say sport philosophy, what pops into your mind initially? Anybody want to share? I'd love to open up the floor.
Adam,
well, for me,
yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, there's a connection between body and mind. So usually we speak like there are two separate things, but at the end, we are a whole, and it's connected. What we do with the body, it influences our mind. So I don't know, that's what comes to mind.
Perfect. So body and mind combined. Absolutely. Excellent point, JC. Thank you. Yeah, John, please. I know this is kind of right up your wheelhouse too. So what are you thinking? Oh, was that John who had his hand up?
Yeah. I don't know if that was by mistake or not, but in the meantime,
okay.
Adam was saying the first thing that comes to mind is play.
Love that. Somebody might actually have a bit of a foreknowledge into where sport philosophy kind of comes from. That's pretty neat. So we got play, we've got mind and body.
Anyone else?
Anything else coming to anybody? Oh, no problem, John. Thank you.
Yeah, whenever you, yeah. Anyone else? If
far from competition.
Competition.
Okay. Competition. I've got Adam put down in there.
Far from competition.
Far from competition.
Not the competitive sports.
Okay. So competition is something kind of outside. Is a different sphere. Okay.
Adam is also saying interaction.
Yep.
Learning.
Okay. Love these ideas. Love these words. One of the things that I find strikingly absent about this is, how do we engage in sport, or how do we engage in physical activity, right? It's something that is done through the body, and it's exerted through motion or movement. So when I say sport philosophy, the way I think about it is motion, movement. And maybe it's a hang up on the word sport, right? We tend to think of sport as one particular thing. When I say sport, I mean, broadly speaking, physical exertion or physical activity.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but this is actually interesting. Like, for maybe the question would be, what do you think, like, or when we say sports, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Everyone, I don't know, because the other day we were discussing whether, for example, dance could be considered sports, for example. Is dancing sports? I don't know. So yeah.
I guess it depends on your definition of sport. And I didn't necessarily want to go down the metaphysical route in terms of exploring sport, because I don't, while I think that's an important component to it, I don't think that's how we actually live a good life, through understanding sport. And that's kind of where my philosophy is geared. It's geared towards action and it's geared towards implementation. And we can argue about definitions, and that's great, because we do need to have a clear sense of what it is we are talking about in the world. But I think one of the problems with philosophy and it breaking out and being as powerful as it could be is we just limit it to the discussion part, and we never make the bridge to how do we live this in the real world? How do we incorporate this into our lives so that we lead a better life? To me, that should be the object of philosophy. That should be the end of philosophy. And so while it would be really cool to go back and forth about, is dance a sport, is gymnastics a sport, are darts a sport, right? Is chess a sport? I think that kind of sidetracks us from how we incorporate the ideas of sport or exertion or motion into our lives in a way that allows us to live the good life. So that's kind of what I would say about that. But when I'm saying sport, I'm not talking about a limited definition of sport. I'm talking about a broad incorporation. So it's competitive, it's not competitive, it's organized, it's unorganized, it's the Super Bowl or UEFA Champions League final, and it's pick up with your friends that you just do at the park, right? It's all that and everything in between. It's me going out for a run right after this talk, which is exactly what I'm going to do. I'd show you my shorts if you wanted, but I don't need to do that. Okay. So when I'm thinking about sport philosophy, I'm thinking about movement, I'm thinking about application, and I'm thinking about the good life. So then instead of sport philosophy, then let's broaden this out. We'll go to the next question, because of course we answer questions with more questions. Beautiful philosophy. Okay, so if I'm trying to gear us towards this idea of motion or movement or application or implementation, what does a philosophy of movement look like? Or when I just say philosophy of movement, now what pops into your mind as opposed to sport philosophy? Or is there even a difference? So same question, I'll open with different question, but I'll open that up for responses as well. What does a philosophy of movement look like?
Can you hear me now, Mahmoud?
Loud and clear, John.
Sorry, Jordan. I'm on my wife's phone. Long story, but it's kind of linked to what I was going to say for the first question. I'm interested in your use of the word "of." So a route I've gone down lately is philosophy for sport, and I suppose it would be the same for movement as well. So philosophy for movement rather than of.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's an answer to your question. It's maybe more of a question around it. I think we see a lot of philosophy of stuff, but I'm really interested in how can we use philosophy for, and obviously in your case, sport and movement.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a distinction that I should be making in my own description here, because that's, I think, that's a really good way to frame the distinction that I was talking about earlier between sort of like philosophy in the ether versus applied philosophy, a philosophy of versus a philosophy for. And so I would actually edit this in real time to reflect that change, because I really like that. What does a philosophy for movement look like?
That wasn't a criticism at all, by the way. That was just me kind of thinking.
As
you were talking.
No, it's a refinement. I appreciate it. I think it's clearer that way what I'm trying to drive towards, and it makes what I'm going to be presenting a lot more clear. So I really appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Yeah, Adam says good movement versus bad movement. Okay. I like that. I like that distinction between good versus bad. Any other thoughts on what a philosophy for movement could look like or should look like? It's a little tricky. Okay, I like this. I like silence because this gives me a chance to come in and fill it. And what I'm going to be presenting is my own perspective, again, based on my historical understanding and my gleaning of philosophy. So all of these are kind of my personal thoughts that I've gained through teaching and through experiencing and through researching. So when we're starting to talk about a philosophy of movement or a philosophy for movement, what we're truly talking about is a philosophy of experience as opposed to a philosophy of knowledge. And in philosophy, we have a school of thought that puts us right in there. And what's funny is that this is one of the most confusing schools of philosophy, I think, if you read the people who promote it. I'm talking about phenomenology. And the chief phenomenologist, the person who's kind of associated with this, is Edmund Husserl. And you try to read his writings on phenomenology, and I don't even know. It's impenetrable stuff. But it's one of the easiest philosophies, I think, for people outside of philosophy to grasp. You know, when we talk about philosophy, people think metaphysics. They think about the definitions, the perfect form, right? Like the what is truth, what is justice, what is beauty, or, you know, the cynical, like what is a chair, what is a table? Like that's what people gravitate towards when they think about philosophy. What is the world made of? How does the world operate? Okay, these are great. But phenomenology just asks a completely different question. Instead of what is the world made of, it's how is the world experienced? Or how do we experience the world? And that's really all phenomenology is. That's the first principle. That's the line of investigation we want to go down. And this creates a plethora of differences and distinctions between sort of a metaphysical understanding of sport, where we're all trying to, you know, through the Socratic dialogue, figure out like scale, category, necessary, sufficient, all those things, right? But we don't need that. We don't need that in a philosophy of or philosophy for movement if we're focusing on the experience. What does it feel like to move? What occurs when we move? How are we transformed? How do we change? Or what stays the same, to the favorite questions of historians. And one of the things in phenomenology that is really important to understand is that it's not just like the big grand experiences, you know, the moments of our lives that are punctuated by memories, right? It's the mundane. It's the literal everyday stuff that happens to us can be incorporated into our understanding. One of the ways I like to describe this is the importance of weather, or the importance of the climate or the environment on your mood, right? A walk to work, a walk to the park is drastically different if the sun is shining versus if it's raining. You experience both differently, right? And they're both relatively ordinary things, but they can have an outsized importance on your day. I don't need to tell you how happy people get when they see the sun breaking through the clouds. You know, everybody is out, everybody is smiling. You know, where I live, 10 degrees Celsius in November feels a lot different than 10 degrees or in October, it feels a lot different than 10 degrees in March, even though it's the same temperature. And these are sort of mundane things, but they have outsized importance on the way we feel and the way we actually live our lives. So there's no such thing as kind of like a mundane activity. And when we're talking about sport, that's like going for a walk with your family can have just as much of an impact as training for an ultra marathon on the very far end of the scale, right? And the sport philosophers that I kind of follow, they are the ones who are preaching this idea of an experience. And this is one of my favorite quotes from really any sport academic, and it's by Jan Rintala. And this gets to, I think it was JC that talked about this idea of mind body is one. We are our bodies, we do not live within them. All right, we are our bodies, we do not live within them. So what happens to our bodies happens to us. We are our bodies. The experiences that we have in our bodies are the experiences that shape who we are and dictate how we're going to act in the world. And this moves us to the next sort of philosophical concept that we can now talk about. Yes, absolutely, John. Sport's gone too far towards the mind and the psychology, the body. Yes, and there's always this push and pull between the body on top or the mind on top, and that's because we live in a universe, in a world, we live in a society that has disassociated body and mind. right? We live with the dualist conception, and there's a historical kind of reason for this. But the opposite is what I think we should be focusing on, which is embodiment, which is a union of biological, psychological, and physical elements of a person. We are our bodies. We do not live within them. This is the exact opposite of the way in which we tend to look at the body and the mind today. The body is separated from the mind. And this is as a result of this guy on the right, Rene Descartes, who gave us a kind of like a philosophy of medicine that was rooted in science, right? In order to heal the body, we have to study the body objectively. And in order to do that, you must separate out the mind. The mind is the subject, the body is the object. And this was really great because it allowed us to figure out ways to cure the body in terms of illness, disease, prevention. This is a lot of the philosophy, this philosophy of Rene Descartes is what has led to incredible advancements of medical science, right? Which is good, but there's a problem. There's a problem in terms of the individual person, right? And it's I think putting us in a doctor's office is actually a really good way to understand this, right? Because when the body is object, the person in front of you, the doctor, is looking at charts. He's looking at statistics. He's looking at measurements. But you, the subject, you have feelings, you have experiences, you have sensations. We've probably all been in a doctor's office where you're describing something. Look, oh, I'm feeling sick. Like I'm coughing up. Like my leg is sore, whatever it is. You're explaining to the doctor how you're feeling. The doctor's not even looking at you. He's looking at the chart. He says, yeah, you may say that, but based on the tests I just ran, nothing's wrong with you. So get out of my sight. Do you feel any better because the measurements haven't necessarily corroborated with your experience? No, you're like, this guy doesn't feel my pain. This guy doesn't care about how I feel about it. So what we've done when we objectify the body is we end up objectifying the person because we are our bodies. We do not live inside of them. So a philosophy of motion, a philosophy for movement, doesn't necessarily care about objective. We're interested in the subjective. Okay, so that's the first thing that we need to really get into our minds, is that it doesn't matter the black and white. We're living in this world of gray when we're talking about a philosophy for movement. And I think that's actually a great place for philosophy as well, because it puts us into a different zone of philosophy. And it was Adam who talked about good movement versus bad movement. Well, okay, we have a philosophy around our morals. We have a philosophy around our ethics. We have a philosophy around what's a good thing in the world and what's a bad thing in the world. And this is where a philosophy for movement should be aimed. We want to use motion and movement to bring about goodness, both in the world, but also for ourselves. Now, there are kind of three ways we could go about this in terms of the traditional ways to understand morality and ethics through philosophy. We could be deontologists. What are we obliged to do? We could be consequentialists. What are the results of our actions? Or we could be in the realm of virtue ethics. What type of person are we? Deontology is nice. Consequentialism is practical. But are either of those related to a subjective understanding of motion? Deontology presents us with an objective list of rules that we must follow. Consequentialism looks at the outcome and sort of disregards all the steps that gets there. Neither of these seem appropriate if we are to think about the subjective elements of motion and incorporating that into a philosophy of the good life. So that kind of puts us into this realm of virtue ethics. What type of person are we? Who are we becoming? How do we act in the world consistently? What do people know us by? Very much so. The buzzword of the age is well-being, largely for exactly body. I believe in terms of like body, mind, and spirit, a philosophy of motion doesn't put the body above any of those elements, but what it does is it centers action through the body first. Because through our bodies, we then experience, and through our experiences, we gain characteristics of virtue, and then we can embody and act those out in other areas of our life. That's essentially what I mean by a philosophy for movement. And I don't know if you're trolling me or not when you say I sound like Plato.
No, I'm
There's
not,
a little
but,
okay.
Because see, this is the thing, and without getting into the details, but many people assume that Plato is always all about just definitions and mind and spirit and stuff like that. But for Plato, like of course, they're both intertwined, but then the most essential thing first is having a healthy, fit, athletic body.
Yeah.
Because without that, according to Plato, you will never be able to actually become
Yes.
a good / virtuous, whatever.
Yes.
Etc.
What's it called?
Definitely much more impressive beard. Definitely.
Yes, thank you, sir. So you're talking about the idea of like Callus Caligula. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. Something like that.
It borderline not lose people around. It's just like the first and foremost is the focus on the body. Like without a proper kind of healthy, fit, properly exercised body, you will never get a healthy between brackets mind.
Yes, and I completely agree with Plato on that. And Plato would argue that we can use the body to harness the instincts and to advance the rational faculty of our mind. Let's sidetrack it. Why not? So Plato, when we're talking about like the spirit or the soul, Plato has a three-part understanding, and he uses an analogy of a two-horse chariot. So there's two horses pulling one chariot, right? The instinct, which is just like our natural base urges, is this big, strong horse, right? That just pulls us around. Then we've got like our rational brain, right? And that's the small horse next to him. It can pull, but it's easily overpowered by the stronger horse. And then we have the charioteer. And that's kind of like, I'm losing it a little bit here. But that's essentially what you do through athletics is you train the charioteer and the small horse to work in tandem to suppress and crush the natural instinct and to steer it in a more rational space. So that's kind of like a little bit into Plato. I'm sorry, I spaced on one of the spots. But it's funny that you say that right now, because check who's on the next slide. Yeah, it's definitely not Plato. And one of the reasons it's not Plato is Plato doesn't believe in mind-body unity. Plato believes in a disembodied conception where the mind is above the body, where the body must be harnessed and punished and beaten down so that the rational mind can live, and the rational mind can essentially point us towards virtue and truth. He's close. Plato is close, but he's not realistic. Okay, Plato's not realistic because the instincts are a part of our nature. And try hard as you will to suppress them, they ain't going away, no matter how hard you think. We all know this. We all know about like the ascetics or the Stoics, right? The people who try to, not necessarily the Stoics, but the people who like will shun emotion or shun feeling. And then, after 10 years, they just blow up and they go on a massive spree, right? Because you cannot suppress what is naturally inside of you. The best you can do is guide it. And Plato, while he was right over the mark, he missed that final crucial link. And that's where his student Aristotle came in and I believe gave us the more solid foundations for a practical philosophy of motion as opposed to more of a theoretical philosophy of motion. And he does this by, again, focusing on the subjective as opposed to the objective. And that's another distinction between these two when thinking about morality. And as I'm kind of suggesting to everybody, morality is the realm of philosophy where motion should be discussed. There's a couple of interesting theory ideas from Aristotle, which point us in this direction. Ontology and eudaimonia. Ontology is the internal drive that orients us towards our highest values or virtues. It's the passion that's inside of you. And one of the reasons this is linked to the subjective is because it's different for each of us, right? You know, the objective is like ice cream is a dessert that's made from milk and churned and frozen. It's usually sweet and got a lot of sugar. Great. Mahmoud, what's your favorite kind of ice cream? Do you have one? Do you have a favorite flavor?
Just for the sake of the discussion, let's say it's salted caramel.
Let's say that's salted caramel, but that's wrong because I know that's not the best flavor. The best flavor is the one that I like the most. It's the difference between the objective and the subjective, right? So we each have different passions. We each have different talents. We each have different skills. We each have different interests. We should allow that kind of voice within ourselves to guide us, because that's sort of like pointing us towards our purpose or our direction in life, right? We are being pulled. We are interested in these things because we have something potentially to give that other people don't, right? And eudaimonia, that's the highest good attainable for any individual, which Aristotle suggests is reason, same like Plato. But eudaimonia allows us to have an individual understanding of what that good is to each of us, as opposed to Plato's conception, which is kind of like, well, it's objectively reason, dummy, come on, right? So Aristotle gives us a place for the subjective. And it's a place for, and essentially what athletics does is it gives us this arena or a means to ingrain within ourselves the greatest virtues, the greatest characteristics that we should be striving for, that highest value, that highest good. And for the ancient Greeks, that was arete. Arete is a very difficult concept to translate, but essentially it's this: the most excellent virtue. So athletics, sport, motion, movement exists so that we can cultivate within us the greatest individual virtues that are possible. And the way they described this most excellent virtue, body and mind combined to aim at moral excellence. I have a quote from the Odyssey, good historian. And I think this gets to the idea of arete being kind of like the mark of yourself or the most important features of yourself. This is a part of the Odyssey where Odysseus, he's in the 9th year. He washes aboard this island. He's treated as an honored guest. They go out, they perform athletic competitions. They offer him to participate. He says, basically, no, I'm old and tired. Please, I don't want to compete. Somebody stands up in the crowd and basically calls him a wuss. Like, you're sissy. Like, you have no courage. You're not an athlete. You're basically just like he calls him like a master peddler sailor who sails from port to port thinking nothing of cargoes, right? So all you care about is money. All you care about is the external crap in the world. And you're definitely not even close to an athlete. To which Odysseus jumps up, hurls a discus twice as far as any of these Phaeacians have done, and then challenges every single person to whatever contest they want. And this is the quote that comes right after that. What you have said to us is not unwelcome, for it is natural that you should want to show your arete, since you were angered by that man standing up in the gathering and sneering at you as if at your arete, although no man in his right senses would do so. So the things that sports allow us to showcase are the most important elements of our character. That's what the ancient Greeks believed. And it was written about and it was celebrated that this was the essence of the athlete. This was the essence of exerted motion or intentional motion was to train you in all of the best virtues that you could acquire, and to do it in a very obvious way that involves toil, struggle, sacrifice, discipline, and hard work. Pindar was the most famous of all the ancient Greek poets. He wrote during the golden age of classical Greece during the 5th century, the 400s BCE. And he wrote a particular poem that was solely meant to praise the athletes. And this is what he often talked about: the toil, the struggle, that athletics essentially gives us an honorable struggle of self, against an opponent, but really to bring out the best within each individual. Here's a nice excerpt from his Ode to Theron of Acragas, which I think is really neat and touches upon kind of the importance of competition, although I'm not really going to dive too much into that. Winning releases from anxieties one who engages in competition. Truly, wealth embellished with virtues provides fit occasion for various achievements. By supporting a profound and questing ambition, it is a conspicuous lodestar, the truest light for man. So athletics orients us to an honorable struggle with ourselves, which allows us to gain virtue and characteristics which are universally admired in our society. And they're universally admired because when we act on them, we bring about the good in the world. But none of that makes any sense without that important part about struggle and toil. That's why it's a philosophy for motion. Going back into the objective, sprinting teaches you something that only sprinting can teach you, that it hurts to sprint, that your lungs burn when you're finished. Going on a long run or lifting a heavy weight is going to teach you something about your body, that it hurts to do these things. You feel this stuff viscerally in your bodies in a way that other activities are not able to impart. Our bodies are incredible for giving us sensations and experiences, and sports are one of the most real experiences and sensations we can subject our body to, because it forces us to feel pain. And it forces us to feel pain when we don't have to, right? We willingly go out and feel pain. And that's a very important part of this, is the willingness to struggle, the willingness to endure, and the willingness to sacrifice in order to achieve. The morality of sports comes to us from Greek mythology, and it's best represented through the persona of Heracles or Hercules, because his story is truly the story of the moral transcendence of the individual through struggle. But what's also intriguing, historically speaking, is that Heracles is the patron saint of the ancient Greek gymnasia. So he's actually kind of like a deity of sports. And so this is really intriguing connection, right? It talks to us a little bit about like the hero's journey and that kind of idea. And actually the word hero is kind of etymologically related to Heracles. It's pretty neat. But essentially, yeah, not only did they roam around naked, but all the Greeks competed against each other naked. Should we aside on the naked statues for a second? There's a funny little piece of information about the naked statues. Does anybody know why the naked statues, the packages of all the athletes are the smallest possible? Does anybody ever notice that? Anybody know why?
This is probably, I don't know if it's wrong, but I remember.
Heard it.
Oh yeah, those who want to jump in, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I heard it was because big penises are unattractive back then.
Fair enough. It's funny. Interesting. You know, the epitome of beauty, the thing that the ancient Greeks thought was the most beautiful thing in the world, was the naked athletic male body, right? So that's kind of interesting, but that's actually not the reason. The reason why they're so small is because it shows immense restraint, because the ancient Greek world is a kind of a homoerotic world, you know, like That stuff is above board. So if you're competing naked against another man and you show arousal, well, that shows that you can't suppress or harness your instincts, that you're not in control of your body. Kind of funny. It kind of goes with this idea of control, though, and harnessing in terms of what Plato was talking about. So it's actually not that bad of an aside to talk about. Pardon me. Going back to Hercules, the story of Hercules is transcendent because it's his choice, right? He's born to a mortal, but Zeus is his father, and he kind of has his birthright stolen from him by the goddess Hera. So in order to reach his potential or his birthright, he's got to go through what are known as the 12 labors. And right as he's coming to adulthood, there's a parable, there's a story about his choice. He's visited by two nymphs. One represents vice, one represents virtue, okay? And let's just go into the quotes. So vice tempts him. I see that you are hesitating, Hercules, by what path you shall enter upon life. If then you make a friend of me, I will conduct you by the most delightful and easy road, and you shall taste of every species of pleasure and pass through life without experiencing difficulties. That sounds like a pretty sweet ride, huh? Nice and comfortable life. You get all the pleasures in the world. Oh, it's beautiful. It's glorious. But we all know that's not the right road that Hercules should take, right? We don't want the easy road in life. And certainly Hercules doesn't take the easy road. So virtue pops up. And this is what she's got to say. Because I know your parents and have observed your disposition in the training of your childhood, from which I entertain hopes that if you direct your steps along the path that leads to my dwelling, you will become an excellent performer of whatever is honorable and noble, and that I shall appear more honorable and distinguished in goodness. I will not deceive you, however, this is the kicker, with promises of pleasure, but will set before you things as they really are. And as the gods have appointed them for what is valuable and excellent, the gods grant nothing to mankind without labor and care. So the choice is clear. Struggle, reach your potential and the highest value you can attain, or choose a life of comfort and sink away into mediocrity and essentially wasted potential. Ouch, hurts. So he chooses the life of struggle. Yeah, comfort is better than struggle. Preach it. Chooses the life of struggle to reach his destiny. He goes on the 10 labors. It's really 12. And then when he's finished, he becomes the only Greek hero. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. Vice makes good arguments. The problem is it doesn't lead to anywhere good.
I'm a couch potato. I'm going to be watching the World Cup on my new couch, and that's it. That's it. Lazy.
Yes. Lazy. Something like that. What's neat about Hercules is he's the only hero in Greek mythology to transcend. So he actually gets to sit amongst the Olympian gods. And it's through this idea of sacrifice and struggle that he's earned that apotheosis, which is the transition from mortal to divine. And one of the cool things about the mythology and the legend of Hercules is that he founded the ancient Olympics before he left. So he left us with competitive athletics as a way to follow his example and to essentially embrace struggle, toil, and sacrifice. And we were talking about the ancient gymnasia, right? So here we go. The good life through athletics. The good life through athletics is one that trains body and mind in harmony through a willingness to struggle and suffer to earn what is ours. And that's what the ancient Greeks were doing in terms of a philosophy for movement. It was a place to exercise balance between mind and body. Mahmoud, here's a Plato quote for you, talking about training the mind and the body. What I should say, therefore, is that these two branches of education seem to have been given by some god to men to train these two parts of us, the one to train our philosophic part, the other to train our energy and initiative. They are not intended, the one to train the body, the other mind, except incidentally, but to ensure a proper harmony between energy and initiative on the one hand and reason on the other by tuning each to the right pitch. So that's kind of the idea of like training the two horses. But Plato talks to us, right, about the importance of body for mind. In terms of a screen sharing, it's still screen sharing, is it not? Thumbs up. I can.
Yeah, if you're talking about the slides, yes, Adam. If you're on a mobile phone, then you might have to. Okay. Cheers.
Good. Cheers. Thank you for that. So again, so what Plato is telling us, right, is mind and body, train them both. Athletics is the place to bring them into harmony. Although I talked a little bit about the distinctions kind of between him and Aristotle. Aristotle also very much into this idea. Oh, where did my Aristotle slide go? Ah, there it is. And I love Aristotle's understanding because he really is focusing on this notion of balance, and he's really aiming us towards the things that matter the most to us. And he talks about this notion of balance through athletic bodies. Athletic excellence of the body consists in size, strength, and swiftness, swiftness implying strength. He who can fling forward his legs in a certain way and move them fast and far is good at running. He who can grip and hold down is good at wrestling. But he who can drive an adversary from his ground with the right blow is a good boxer. He who can do both the last is a good pancreationist, while he who can do all is an all-round athlete, right? Train the body, train the mind. Don't just focus on one or the other. And that should also be expressed in the way we practice with our bodies. Don't specialize in one thing or another. Don't just try to become good at sprinting. Try to become good at all the sports. And Aristotle and Plato, they actually shouted down the athletes of their day because they more closely resembled the professionals that we have today, where you only train in one sport so that you can get really good at one sport so that you can become professional, and then you can make a living from just being excellent at that one sport, which they didn't like. They didn't like that idea because athletics aren't vocational. They're moral and ultimately spiritual in their nature, because what they should be doing is teaching us about who we are and allowing us to acquire virtue, as opposed to tilting us towards the external world and the goods and the riches and things that come with that element. That's one part of the philosophy I didn't necessarily talk about too much today, but this idea of internal drive is huge. We do things for the reasons why we want to do them that are being driven inside of us. Pancreationist, yes, equals MMA. There were three ancient combat sports. There was the heavy boxing, there was the wrestling, and then there was the pancration, which was kind of like the mix of the heavy boxing and the wrestling. And there were only two rules in pancration: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else you could do. Yeah, nuts. And what's striking, unintended pun, is that boxing was actually the one where most people died, because the Greeks used to affix kind of like leather straps, kind of almost like brass knuckles. So you can imagine the heavy blows of bare knuckle boxing with a little bit of extra oomph. And lots of people did not come back from that. But to sort of close off here, when I'm thinking about a philosophy for movement, a philosophy of sport, how to apply these lessons into a good life, what I'm telling everybody here is sport philosophy should be a philosophy of struggle and triumph. The reason athletics exists is to cultivate virtues through discomfort. It's a willing submission to sacrifice. It's a willing submission to discomfort, right? None of us have to do any of these things. There's no objective good in running as fast as you can run or lifting as hard as you can, right? They don't matter in the world like being a general or being a doctor or, like doing something that actually impacts people's lives. So then why are we doing these things? What utility is there? Well, again, it's to bring about within ourselves our true and best potential, right? But we can only do it if we willingly submit to discomfort and to struggle, right? And that's the ultimate utility. I know. Well, I'm not a utilitarian, because I'm not telling you to go do it I'm not telling you to do it for the sake of utility.
I told you I was going to heckle.
That's a great heckle. I appreciate it. Keep it coming. We have to have it. There has to be, if we're trying to apply something, then there has to be a consequence, right, in the world of our actions. And so what is the consequence of running really fast? It's moving from
In
point A to
today's
point B.
talk, I proved that Jordan Goldstein is a utilitarian consequentialist.
Okay, we're gonna have to fight about that, but that's okay. It's a good one. You're really good at. Whoever said he wasn't good at heckling? No, he's good. He's really good. Pardon me. Pardon me. Yes, in a sense, there's a utility to doing this, but the utility is different for each person because the characteristics and traits that we can cultivate within ourselves are subjective to the individual's journey. Okay, so my utility is different than your utility, right? I go and run in the trails for a bunch of different reasons, and that might be totally different from the reason that you go onto the beach and play footy with your friends. You know what I mean? But the utility of that is to engender the best parts of our spirits and our characters through this notion of struggle and competition and toil. And that's the reason why the athletes were celebrated and praised in the ancient world. That's where a philosophy of their morality came from. And that's kind of the philosophy that I'm preaching today is go out, experience the world through your body, make it hurt, do it in a way that you love, that speaks to your talent and your passion. So go play a sport or do an exercise that you just love to do. And by doing that, you're going to bring about the best parts of yourself so that when adversity, struggle, roadblocks hit outside of the world of sports, you're able to sail over them and transcend limitations of who you thought you could believe. Nice. Yep. We'll come full circle on that. I could talk for another 20 hours on this stuff, but I know we're not supposed to do that. And I probably already talked too long. So I appreciate everybody listening. I appreciate the time that I could lay out some of these ideas in a particular way. So thank you everybody for sticking with it. Thank you for the heckles. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your contributions, everybody. And I'll just open it up to questions, discussion, criticisms. And you guys can see those are the ways you can get a hold of me. I'll leave this up on the screen for just a moment in terms of come follow me on Twitter, shoot me a DM anytime. They're always open. If you got something longer that you want to say, question, there's my email. I'll leave that up. But otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Mahmoud and let the interrogation begin.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for this. I'll leave it up to you actually. If anyone writes a question in the chat, just read it out loud for those who are following the recording. Other than that, I'll leave it up to you. You handle it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So yeah, so just if anybody has a question, feel free to unmute and ask or drop it in the chat. Is philosophy a sport? Asked Adam. Well, I guess that depends on what your definition of sport is. And for me, something that's combative and competitive is not necessarily sport, even if it has sort of like a sporting ethos. And to me, sport is physical. It requires physicality, and not just any kind of physicality. Sports are games, first and foremost. All sports are a game. And this will be a question, I think, that we'll talk about esports here. So I'll try and answer both at one. So what makes a game is artificial limitations that make completing the object of the game more difficult, right? So like in Monopoly, it would be a lot easier if you could just take however much money you wanted from the bank at the beginning of your turn. That would really make it easy to buy lots of properties, right? To go around the board and be able to pay off all your rents. But that's just not how the game Monopoly works, because we want it to be a little bit harder. Yeah, but the game would fall apart. The rules make the game. The rules make the game. So all that a sport is a game where the limitation is physical. You have to perform a physical act in order to go over and above the limitation. This is why I would say something like darts is a sport, but something like chess is not. Darts is not very physical, but in order to hit the board, there's a motion. There's a physical motion you've got to do. Chess, you can play by mail. You don't have to. Well, yeah, that was the question. The question was, is philosophy a sport? You know, come on. So So chess isn't a sport because the thing that there's the limit in the game is not a physical component. It's not a physical quality, right? So is philosophy a sport? Nah, it's not. I mean, it's kind of like, is chess a sport? No. But there is a sport called chess boxing where you play chess and then you punch each other in the face for 90 seconds. And then you go back and play chess. And then you get up and you punch each other in the face for 90 more seconds. So could you turn philosophy into a sport? Maybe if there was some way that we could put a physical limit on it, then yeah, we could maybe do it, because ultimately philosophy and sport are both about creating. Is kneading bread a sport? You could make it one. If you turn it into a game, then yes, you could turn.
They're not
into
trolling you here. This is a
no, I know,
serious question. Yeah,
that is a serious question. I get it, because I'm talking about something that's physical, and eating bread is something that's obviously physical.
but
right?
Exactly, like it's quite physical. Like yeah.
Something I'd like to think about often is drumming, like, because I'm a musician too. So is like drumming a sport? Drumming is incredibly physical. Could you turn drumming into a sport? Absolutely, just some competition. All you have to do is gamify something, turn it into a contest, and then make sure that whatever you need to win the contest is the physical act. They've turned lumberjack skills into sports, like chopping down wood and trees. You ever seen those international lumberjack competitions? Anybody seen those? Yeah. Vikya. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, right? So you'd be like,
I just said yes, I did see.
Oh, you have? Yeah, absolutely. You've seen it, right?
Them, and then there are like levels, and yeah. I know what you're talking about.
So anything physical, yeah. So Telmo, kneading bread on your own right now, not a sport, but if somebody gamified it, it could be.
Okay. And this is actually an interesting nuance there. So you're saying that. So is the difference between movement as such and sports is the fact that we turn them into a competition?
In some elements, sports a game, which is one of the reasons why I probably didn't use the correct terms, and why I started out, like, when I say sport, what I'm more talking about is like physical exertion or like intensity when it comes to moving our body. And it's more so related to the idea of struggle. And using our bodies in a way to struggle for the sake of feeling the struggle in our body. So kneading bread certainly hurts our forearms, but we do it so we can have a beautiful loaf that we can eat afterwards, right? If all you're doing is kneading the bread to work on your forearm muscles as an exercise. So again, it's like, there's no like hard and fast way, I think, to think about these things. When you're trying to get into the metaphysics of like what is a sport and what isn't, then I'll tend to come down kind of hard on definitions. But if we're trying to extract the value from moving our bodies, well, then I'd love to expand the definition. So it's really kind of which sandbox we want to play in when we're talking about philosophy. So in that sense, is esport a sport? This is a pretty good one. I was somebody who used to say no, but now I'm probably someone who would put esport in the category of like very low grade physical sports, because I do believe there are physical qualities that allow some people to be better in esports than others. If you're talking about click rates, if you're talking about hand-eye coordination, there are elements of physicality, there are elements of skill that are related through the body that will determine who's going to win or lose the game. And so I now tend to put esport into sport, but I would suggest it's not emblematic of the ways in which we want to best move our bodies to live the good life. if that makes sense.
In terms of chess as well, though, Jordan, because this is just me thinking when you were talking. If we're about embodiment and body first, well, chess is obviously a very brain-based game, isn't it? You need a high level of intellect to play it well.
Yep.
And the brain is in the body. And it's also quite endurance-based in a way. You can have really, really long games.
Yep.
So because it's brain and you're not running, punching, jumping or anything, but you're still using your brain, which is your body. So where does the line come between, I know you mentioned exertion before.
Yeah, I guess that's the difference between like acting and thinking, right? What's the act in chess? Like you actually don't even need to move your body at all in terms of to play the game of chess. People used to play chess by mail, right? That's the distinction I'm getting at. And I agree with you about the blurriness of this stuff. And that's why I didn't do my presentation on the definition, the objective definition of sport. That's just kind of like where the questions went. So I'm kind of feeling that way, but I'm much more interested in the expanded understanding, because I don't think that the distinctions make too much of a difference, honestly, because you can experience the benefits of embodiment through something like chess or through something like kneading bread, and you could be totally superficial and not get anything out of sprinting, So I tend to come down much more on the subjective element. Personally, I'm just trying to be a little bit on that objective side here, as well. And when it comes to the definition of sport, that's if you force me into one corner, that's kind of like the definition I like to play with, although it's certainly up for debate, and sport philosophers have a robust definition. And we didn't even get to things like play or because sport exists in a triangle with play and games. And so in order to define sport, you have to define play, and you also have to define games, because they're inseparable, the three of them. So I don't know if that's really a question, but or an answer to anybody's question, but philosophy doesn't necessarily need to drive us to answers, just more questions.
Yeah, Anthony just shared a link. I obviously did not read the article, but then about the surprising physical demands of chess.
Yes.
Yeah, short end is like Federer burns 560 calories in an hour of tennis, and a grandmaster will burn the same in 2 hours of chess.
Oh, easily. Yeah,
I mean, it's just a link on the internet.
And just to weigh in on this, has nothing to do with that. But then I remember this from Death Note. I don't know if you've seen this anime. It's so L from Death Note is always saying, thinking also kind of demands a lot of energy, and this is why he eats a lot of sugar and this kind of. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so I could presume that chess does the same in this case.
If you're a grandmaster and you're at the highest levels of chess, it is an absolute physical ordeal that you must go through. That still doesn't mean that the game of chess hinges upon a physical act in order for you to win it. It's like me studying for a test is if I cram overnight, it's very physical and it's very demanding of me, but no one will suggest that it's like a physical thing that I'm doing when I go and sit in a chair and I do my test for 2 hours, right? So that's kind of like the distinction that I'm trying to get at. I completely empathize with that idea of like the physicality of these things, for sure. It's just like, is the thing that makes chess go is there physicality? Yeah, either way. On cultivating virtue through discomfort, how do you think about whether there's too little or too much discomfort? That is an excellent question. That's related to each individual, where they are in their journey. Somebody like me, I could take on a tremendous amount of discomfort because I've been training myself to do it for a long time. So what looks like discomfort for me might look like insanity to you, and what looks like discomfort to you might just look like a normal routine day for me, or vice versa, right? It's not like I'm the hardest person around. Like I'm soft in a lot of other ways, right? Pardon me. So I think, Prab, it's relative to where you're starting, what you're doing, and what you're trying to accomplish. Like there are certainly extremely discomforting things that I would suggest everybody should be trying to do, but should we all go and do it to the same level? Yeah, I don't think so. One of the things that I preach about practically on how to use the body to sort of strengthen the mind is through cold exposure. And that's why I have my ice beard picture. Everybody can benefit from some cold exposure. Doesn't mean you have to go and do an ice bath or jump into a freezing river. You could just put a little cold water on the back of your neck, or turn your shower to cold for 10 seconds at the end, right? Like the suffering is relative. Each person's suffering is relative unto themselves. And I would suggest the more willing you are to go through struggle, then the more virtue you'll find on the other side. But you have to make sure you do get to the other side. So that's also a calculation. But this is where the idea of the mundane comes in to play, right? It's like, for you, if that 10-second cold shower is like the hardest thing that you're going to do that day, well, then amazing. Like, that's not trivial. That's not small. That's a huge win, even though it's just 10 seconds and it's just a little cold water. You know what I mean? Like, our experiences can become outsized, right? And so that's what I would say about discomfort. The more you're willing to take on, yes, the more virtue you can acquire, but that looks different to each and every one of us. Who would you say is the most philosophical athlete you have ever seen or heard? Ooh, this is a good one. The most philosophical athlete, in my experience, would probably be Ken Dryden. Do people know who Ken Dryden is? Is that a name? Any Canadians? Any people who love hockey? Ken Dryden was a goaltender. He was a goaltender in the 1970s. He was Canada's goaltender in the Summit Series against the Soviet Union in 1972. He's the goaltender. I know. I'm sorry. I'm a Canadian. What do you want?
What does that even mean?
Summit Series was like the Cold War on ice. Capitalist West versus Communist East.
No. The what the guy did?
Which guy?
Your guy.
Oh, Ken Dryden.
Yeah.
What's a goalie? Oh, I'm sorry. In hockey.
No. Wait a second. Hockey. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
I'm talking about ice hockey.
You have to correct. Okay, ice hockey, and then.
Sorry, I know. In Canada, if you say hockey,
we only know football. Well, I
know
football. And
I know. This is my litmus test to see who's Canadian or not. Okay, so I guess I'm the only one here. Ooh, bad. Okay, so ice hockey goalie. He's an ice hockey
Canadian
goalie.
too.
Oh, great, Nala. You're
but I'm Lebanese Canadian, but I love hockey. I got used to hockey.
Amazing. So Ken Dryden's a hockey goalie, and a hockey goalie has potentially a lot of time to think on the ice. And Ken Dryden is actually, I wish I could find, there's a if somebody could Google Ken Dryden pose and like put it in the chat, this is like the philosopher athlete in picture form, because he also played for probably the greatest team in NHL history, the Montreal Canadiens dynasty of the late 1970s. So there were times where he literally would be doing nothing on the ice because his team was just popping goals in on the other side. But he was an educated man. He's a lawyer. And he wrote probably the greatest sports book ever called The Game. And it's an intricate, detailed analysis of the ebbs and flows of the game of hockey and the experience of playing with it that then maps out onto greater life. So I'm gonna put that in the chat. The Game by Ken.
This is precisely my first thought, Delmo.
Looks like Jason from the horror movies. Let me see if this is the right photo, first of all, because he's going to have definitely the horror mask. Yes. He was famous for standing like this, like with his stick up and basically like watching the game, because he was bored because his team was just winning. Like the other team never really came into his zone. He never had to do anything, but he was excellent. He's a Hall of Fame goaltender, right? So he was able to sort of think, but then act. But the game, if people are really interested, they like kind of like reading a good book about sports. The Game by Ken Dryden is really good. So that's my answer to your question, John. Great question. Pardon me.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. I'm going to check out that book.
Yeah, I think you'll really enjoy it. He's a very smart guy. Very smart. Not so much in politics, but certainly has a lot of good things to say.
By the way, before anyone has any other question, starting December 6th, if I'm not mistaken, Jordan Guru Anaerobic, Mark Baker, and Urtats are going to be also leading a course titled Lessons from Sports to Live a Better Life. So I'm going to be sending this email out to those who signed up as well, but this is a 30% also discount for those who signed up if you're interested. Jordan can tell you more about the course shortly. But yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think that might be it.
Any other, Telmo? Yeah. See, you are unmuted.
Oh no, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Any other questions or anything related to what Jordan talked about today?
No, I wonder if there's a difference between sports that are competitive with others or sports that are competitive against yourself. If you think that's going to result in different kind of outcome or different experience.
Yes, I actually believe each sport tends towards different virtues. Like you play a specific sport, and certain, like if you play hockey, you're going to get something different than if you run track, than if you do gymnastics. Like I think each sport speaks to different virtues, and that's why different people are interested in watching or participating or playing those sports, or find joy in moving their bodies that way. So I absolutely think even that comes down to categories. Individual sports are definitely different than team sports. Sports where there's an objective score or a measure or a time are different than judged sports where you're kind of performing for a panel. All of these things I think will tilt you towards different virtues. We could get into a long debate about what those are, but the short answer to your question is yes, there's definitely a difference. And that's kind of one of the fun things, is then you can start to think, well, it's like, well, if I love hockey, what does that say about me? What kind of virtues do I respond to? One of the big things in ice hockey, that's a huge virtue for me in my life is loyalty. Loyalty is a huge component of ice hockey, more so than in other team sports. Like that's why there's a lot of fighting in hockey. Okay. It's dangerous, but the loyalty to your teammates is incredibly strong, and people willingly sacrifice themselves by fighting in order to protect a fallen teammate or someone who they felt has got cheap shotted. And that's an integral part of the game. And to people who don't understand it on the outside, it looks like barbarism. But for the people on the inside of the game, they know exactly what's happening. So that's just one kind of example. But you could think about all the different sports, right? Like what's the virtues that come out of watching football, the world's most popular sport, right? I think a lot of it is cohesion, being in a community, like all pulling together. You don't think so? In terms of like playing football, there's so little outcome in football. It's so processed. It's just based on players moving around, right? And then you get that goal. No, you don't like that one. Okay, so I'm wrong. That's fine.
Not necessarily wrong or right, but then it's like they're moving around, but then there's something more to it. But that's a whole different story, because in my case it's
See, Prab gets me.
But this is because like it's one of the things that are interesting about sports, not in terms of, maybe not necessarily in terms of the player's perspective, but from a spectator's perspective. The difference between football and other sports is that the offside rule creates a certain tension that allows for some sort of novelty to be created. You know, like you're constantly trying to break the offside rule in order to be able to score. And so far as you're not scoring, of course, but anyway, so I agree with you, maybe not in terms of movement or anything of the sort, although I do think there's a lot of movement there, depending on your what position you play in. But from a spectator's aesthetic perspective, there's more to football than any other sports. Like it allows you to enjoy the game despite the fact that there are clear rules and, you know, pre-established space.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that idea. And we didn't even talk about spectacle versus consumption.
Yeah, of course. This is why I'm saying it's like from a spectator, not necessarily from a player / sport perspective, cool. Kind of. Yeah.
Like I'll leave on like one of the things that I think bogs people down in terms of like sport is like, well, if I'm not playing, can I watch? And if I watch, how am I supposed to watch? And can I watch and still gain the values if I'm not participating? And you can.
Your tweets are constantly bashing those who are only couch potatoes. Yeah.
Only doing that. Like you should watch. I don't think it's entertainment. I don't think you watch sports. Okay, there's a difference. I don't think you watch sports for entertainment. I think you watch it for education and inspiration. Okay. So that's the difference for me. It's like if you're watching a team or an athlete that you truly love and you're inspired by their performance, and then you go out and you do something great because of it, that's a good unto the world. Watching sports can then be good. The problem is when you watch sports and you just consume, right? Consume, watch. Like that's the problem. The problem is the overconsumption and not related to and not related to then applying it. Like the ancient Greeks, 40,000 of them used to descend every 4 years to the foot of Mount Olympus to watch the ancient Olympics, right? But what didn't they have? Comfort. There were no stands. It's hot in the Greek summer. You got 40,000 people not bathing, stinks, uncomfortable, yet they're all going there. And these are like the richest people in the ancient Greek world. So they're going to this place to be particularly uncomfortable as spectators. Why are they doing that? Because they want to see the athletes. They're inspired by their performance. They are motivated by the struggle that they see them going through. They share part of that struggle. That's another important thing about consumption. If you're sharing the struggle alongside of the athletes, then you're kind of engaging in it with them. It's the difference between like sitting on the couch and being like this, or everybody knows that really passionate fan, like when their team's on, like they're pacing around the room, and it's the last word that you're ever going to use to describe that person is entertaining. Like they're not entertaining themselves. They're putting themselves through like anguish and anxiety and like intensity. Thanks, John. That's exactly right. Right. So, so as long as you're engaging in struggle, then watching sport becomes a vehicle for you to then touch the virtues as well. But you have to be uncomfortable as in that spectator role in one way or another. So sitting in your lazy boy couch with your 90-inch screen and your surround sound and you never move and you're just getting drunk, well, yeah, that's bad. That's a bad way to watch sports. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a good way to watch sports, because I truly believe that there are lots of good ways that we can consume sports, but you got to be careful about it.
Maybe one last question. Nahla sent it in private, but I think it's meant to you. So
sorry, I don't know why it went private.
Well, maybe you can ask the question yourself.
I asked like, why do you think athletes nowadays achieve this moral virtue that you associated with being an athlete, and if not, why? How come they didn't?
Great question. I say some do, most don't. Most don't because we live in the world where sport is seen as entertainment and spectacle, and so the incentives for people to come in are to be the performers and are to extract external value from it. So most professional athletes, I would suggest, are not the best role models, but there are excellent examples. Somebody mentioned like Roger Federer, an amazing example of somebody who sports fans, non-sports fans look at and say, this guy is the epitome of like class, dignity, grace, good sportsmanship, right? He embodies all of the virtues we would hope a grand champion of tennis would embody. So there are examples, and you have to look at the people who, it's not the fact that Roger Federer got rich from playing tennis. It's that every time he went out on the course, he played tennis the way we hoped the best champion would play tennis. That's kind of the way I could think about it. So there are certainly individual athletes who I think do measure up. I would just suggest we don't understand athletics through this lens, and we use them incorrectly in society as entertainment and a spectacle and a show, which distorts and moves us away from their true purpose and true value, which is this virtue, individual character generating activity. So hopefully that answers your question, but it is an excellent question. Thank you so much for that, Noah.
Yeah, but could it be also that when you are so much into sports, you are kind of a bit putting your intellect aside sometimes, because you're exercising, obsessed about, winning. And so, I don't know, your intellect is kind of ignored. Not for many athletes, but for, in general.
So, and put differently, she's talking about the gym bros,
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot of negative.
No, not necessarily. It could be also athletes.
Yeah, I would suggest that, again, they're getting it wrong because they're not expressing that idea of mind-body balance, right? So if my tweets, I also go after the gym bros, like who are idiots, like the ones who don't read, right? The ones who don't debate, the ones who don't engage in dialogue, right? They're not. You have to cultivate mind and body together. That's the ultimate sign of an athlete, or the ultimate representation of the athlete. So I would agree with you. And I think the reason why we see so much of that is because of this distorted understanding of what sports are as an activity and what we should be utilizing and using them for. And so I agree with you. And that's just as much of a problem as brainy people not working on their bodies.
That's again, sorry to jump in, but this is actually quite interesting, because a couple of courses ago we were discussing just that this separation between, these people are athletes and these people are scientists, or these people are, the intellectuals. It's like, how the hell did we get from ancient Greece, where you had to be physically fit, blah blah blah, in order to be, the mind and the body, into oh no, but this guy is a scientist or philosopher or whatever, and you look at them and they're like, and then the athletes, who you look at them and, just like Nahla said, they're just obsessed. It's like both of them are obsessed with two extremes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's exactly right. So if we have a proper understanding and a proper way to apply that understanding, well, then we can rectify the problem by being strong in body and mind at the same time. And I truly believe that when you engage with this notion that sports is a purposeful struggle, then that naturally comes at it. Dad bods are better than the six pack. What? I think a dad bod doesn't need to have. I
blame capitalism.
That's a big boogeyman for sure.
But this is the thing. This is the question that like the capitalism and what Anthony said. Is it money?
Well, I mean,
in the case of athletes, at least,
there's an inertia.
Business.
It's like well, the ancient Greeks had the same problem. Were they capitalist? Was capitalism the thing that turned the athletes from amateurs into specialists, who they called prostitutes? Right? Like, was capitalism the thing that drove the Roman Empire to put on gladiator contests and chariot races for the spectacle of the masses in order to keep them politically in the dark? I think within any human activity, there's the potential for good and bad. And sports, the thing that is inherent in sport, and maybe this relates to the idea of capitalism, although I don't like to call, I think it's the notion of competition breeds intensity and seriousness. Like whenever you're competing in something, the external drive of just wanting to win in whatever that competition is overtakes the internal drive of why you're doing the competition in the first place. And that's just human nature. And that's what ends up happening. The more importance you place on competition, the more people are willing to just be involved in it for the sake of competition. And eventually that leads to the external riches that come with specialization. But I don't think it's necessarily like a capitalism issue. I think it's a more of a human spirit condition when it comes to competition. Humans love to win. And eventually, if you make winning important enough, they'll do whatever it takes to win. And so there's a paradox inherent within sport. But I mean, life is a paradox. And if you can't accept paradoxes, then you're going to have a really hard time accepting life and enjoying it. that's my perspective, at least. Like, that's a grand philosophy that I have.
And this is a last question, I promise, but this is related to your tweets usually, you know, about Aristotle and mediocrity and excellence, and stuff like that. And now talking about competition and winning. So this kind of paradox, if you want to call it paradox, but because I understand like Aristotle's excellence differently from the tweets, from your tweets at least, you know, that mediocrity is not good or whatever. Wouldn't it be much better to just not focus so much on competition, on winning, on stuff like that? Like mediocrity doesn't have to be I came in first, you came in second in the absolute sense. Like, okay, this is the most important thing, but putting in all you have in order to achieve the maximum you can get. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm making sense even, but
yeah, no, what you just said is the idea of excellence. It's excellence unto each individual, not relative excellence overall to everybody else's standard. Like sports allow us to have an objective measure of excellence in terms of like, oh, this person ran the fastest or that person jumped the farthest. But what that serves to do is it serves to prove to us that limits are limits, and that through hard work and dedication, you can actually go above and beyond the limit that you think you can achieve. It's like the 4-minute mile, right? It's like nobody thought the 4-minute mile was humanly possible to achieve. And Roger Bannister did it. Sir Roger Bannister did it. And then like within a week, 2 other people did it. So it's like, we need the objective measure so that we can show that these are just sort of like false limits we place upon ourselves. And now you literally have hundreds of like high school boys who run a 4-minute mile every year. It's crazy. Thank you, Phya. Appreciate it. So that's part of the problem, is that when we talk about excellence and winning, we focus on the outcome instead of the process that's involved in it. So that would be my retort. It would be like, let's just turn it back to the idea of the process and the journey and forget about the individual outcomes. It's just kind of like our moral characters doesn't mean just because you describe me as a loyal person doesn't mean I'm going to 100% be loyal in every single element. I'm going to fail. Like I'm going to mess up. I'm going to make a mistake. Like perfection is not unto this world. What we can hope for best and most is consistency. That's why we focus on process or journey as opposed to outcome and result, because that tilts us away from the true value. So I would suggest that whenever people talk about excellence and winning and relate it solely to the idea of the outcome, they're also misunderstanding the point. And so that's again what then tilts us towards the external and the riches. Well, if winning is the thing that's most important, well, then by the virtue of the fact that I've won means that it's X, Y, and Z. And that kind of tilts you back towards the consequentialist idea of things now, doesn't it? And I already said that's not a great way to go about it when it comes to a subjective understanding of motion and movement. So there's my answer to that one.
Yeah, this is actually the paradox, right?
Yes,
kind of more or
it
less.
is.
But yeah, on my end, thank you very much, Jordan, for doing this. I'm really looking forward to next month's course. And yeah, if there's any final thoughts, if not,
thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, by the way.
Thank you, John. Cheers. Thank you, Ramsey. Thanks.
Thank you,
everybody. Thanks. You. You're welcome. And that was great. Thank you so much for hosting me. And yeah, awesome. Great time. Academic-y, not academics.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining. And
thanks, Ramsey.
yeah.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it, bro.
TRM.
All right. I'm going to go run in the forest. Let's
Enjoy, man. Take a picture and share on Twitter.
I will. It's a beautiful, it was like a horrible, rainy, gloomy day. And it's like incredibly sunny out now. So yes, it's like very much motivated.
Hell yeah. Enjoy your run, man. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, everyone. That was great. A lot of fun. Cheers.
Bye-bye.